Hello, my name's Vivian. My brother once poured pepper on me, right outside the company I helped build, called me a leech, told me I was nothing. And my mother? She told me not to ruin his chances. They all did, for years. They stole my education, erased my name from the will, forced me to pack my bags in silence and leave with nothing. But I didn't disappear. I built something they never expected. And the day he walked into that boardroom, thinking he was pitching his future, he didn't know I was already sitting at the head of the table. So tell me, what would you do if the people who loved you the least shared your last name? There's something about the smell of pepper sauce that clings to your skin. Long after it's gone, you can scrub it, soak it, cover it with perfume, but that sharp tang finds a way to linger, just like the things people say when they think you don't matter, especially when that person is your own brother. It was a crisp spring morning in Denver, the kind where the sky is too blue for bad things to happen. I had on my navy blazer, the one with the inside pocket stitched with initials no one but I recognized. I'd packed my lunch, nothing fancy, just leftover quinoa salad and a bottle of lemon water tucked neatly in the bag I'd carried for years. The streets buzzed with the usual 8 a.m.'s rush, clean-cut professionals, power walkers, people with somewhere to be. I was one of them. And I had somewhere very specific to be. As I approached the company entrance, I saw him. Dorian. Slouched near the side gate in scuffed work boots, faded flannel, and a look on his face like the world owed him more than he'd ever earned. He didn't see me at first. His eyes scanned the sidewalk like he was waiting for someone, maybe an HR rep, maybe a miracle. Then his gaze landed on me. "Hey!" he barked, striding toward me like a man convinced of his own importance. "You just gonna hover around these buildings all day like a stray dog? This is private property. You don't belong here." I stopped walking. My fingers tightened around the strap of my bag. "You got no shame, huh?" He kept going, louder now. "Always leeching? Always in somebody's way. What's next? Gonna ask for bus fare too?" I didn't say a word. He reached into his lunch sack, pulled out a bottle of hot sauce, Texas Blaze, I recognized the label, and without warning, he flipped the cap and splashed the contents at me. My forearms took the brunt. The liquid sizzled against my skin, spicy and humiliating. "There. Maybe now you'll remember what it feels like to get burned," he sneered. People stopped. A few glanced around, pretending not to see. One woman pulled her child away gently, as if I might infect him with whatever invisible shame Dorian was pouring on me. A security guard stood 10 feet away. Our eyes met. He looked down. I stood there, letting the sting settle in. My body was frozen, but my mind was a furnace. This wasn't the first time Dorian had thrown something in my face, just the first time it had been literal. Without a word, I took out a tissue from my bag, wiped the worst of the sauce from my sleeve, and walked away. I didn't run. I didn't cry. I walked, because every ounce of me was focused on what came next. There was a bench near the corner of 17th and Blake where I used to sit during lunch breaks before. Everything. It felt familiar enough to stop. My fingers were sticky, the tissue now a mess in my lap. I didn't look at the passers-by. I stared at my hands, at the redness blooming where skin met vinegar. My phone rang. I didn't need to check the caller ID. Only one person called me at this hour and still used the same tired ringtone. Family first. I pressed the answer button, but didn't speak. "Vivian?" My mother's voice came through, that mix of warning and disappointment she'd perfected long before I turned 20. "I heard Dorian's at your building today. Don't start anything. He's trying to get back on his feet. He's got a meeting." I bit the inside of my cheek. "He's doing the best he can," she went on. "And you? Well, you've always been so stubborn. Don't ruin this for him. Just stay out of his way, please." She said it like I was a landmine, something dangerous if stepped on, but still my fault if someone got hurt. I didn't reply. "Vivian, are you there?" I ended the call. I sat there another minute. My shoulders didn't shake. I didn't let myself spiral. Instead, I reached into my bag, pulled out the compact mirror I barely used, and checked the damage. My eyes looked calm, but the fury lived just beneath the surface. Then came the vibration. A message on screen. "Boardroom prep complete. We start in 20 mins. HR." I snapped the mirror shut. Eck folded the tissue, stood slowly. There were restrooms in the lobby. I could have gone in, cleaned myself up, put on a fresh blazer from the executive closet upstairs. But I didn't. I wasn't going to hide the evidence. I crossed the street and re-entered the building, through the same doors Dorian would soon walk through, thinking he belonged. He had no idea what door he was about to walk into, and I was the one walking into the fire first. That thought didn't just echo. It rooted itself somewhere beneath my ribs as the elevator climbed, floor by floor. I wasn't shaking, but I could feel the adrenaline buzzing in places I hadn't acknowledged in years. The conference was set. The boardroom was waiting. But I needed a moment, away from everyone, away from the weight of what I was about to do. I ducked into the executive restroom, same floor, 2 doors down from the main boardroom. It was silent, pristine, untouched this early in the day. I turned the lock and let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. Setting my bag down on the sleek countertop, I pulled out a compact packet tucked beneath my planner. Inside, a sealed envelope. Worn edges, slight discoloration, but I'd kept it all these years. I slid my fingers over the flap, not to open it again. I didn't need to. I already knew every word, every line. What made this paper unbearable wasn't the content, it was the signature. A scrawl that was supposed to be mine, but wasn't. My own name, written in someone else's hand. The forged withdrawal form. I stared at myself in the mirror, older now, sharper. The girl who once begged to go to college now stood in the very building she could have only dreamed about back then. They thought they erased me, I whispered, voice steady. And like a tape on rewind, the memory started playing. I was 17. Senior year. Acceptance letter to UC Santa Cruz, printed in bright school colors and sealed with the kind of paperweight that made it feel real. I'd earned it. Every late-night study session, every debate team trophy, every part-time shift at the diner downtown. That acceptance was my way out. Mom called me into the kitchen that day. She was slicing apples like it was any ordinary afternoon. Dad sat at the table, pretending to scroll through his phone. The air felt tight, and I remember thinking they were going to surprise me with a celebration. Instead, Mom slid a folded form across the table. Her voice was calm, collected. "You won't be going," she said. I blinked, confused. "What?" "We've already submitted your withdrawal. It's done," she replied, tapping the paper gently. I unfolded it. There it was. My name, my fake signature, the lie of my consent written in curling loops I'd never use. "You're needed here, Vivian. Your brother has interviews coming up. He needs transportation, support, and with your father's hours being cut." She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. Dorian walked into the kitchen at that moment, talking on the phone, laughing. He didn't even glance at me. He snatched an apple slice from the cutting board and kept walking. "You're the girl," Mom said firmly, meeting my eyes. "You know what that means. Family first." That phrase, that cursed phrase, they wielded it like a sword every time I dared to dream. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I went to my room, packed away the banner I'd bought with the UC logo on it, and folded the college sweatshirt I'd treated myself to. That was the first time I learned silence can be a survival tactic. The mirror in the restroom showed me a woman now. Not that girl anymore, but the weight in my chest. It was still hers. I zipped up the black blazer, the custom one I'd had stitched when I took the leadership offer from the board in secret. Inside, right over my heart, the initials, VWC. I wiped my face, retouched my lipstick, and tucked the envelope back into the inside pocket of my bag. As I stepped out of the restroom and walked toward the boardroom, another memory pushed its way forward: high school graduation. Dorian's party had been in full swing: decorations, speeches, even a rented canopy in our backyard. Dad grilled steaks, Mom passed around his baby photos, toasts were made. Everyone raised glasses to the one who's going to carry the Kane name with pride. And me? No one mentioned that I had graduated a semester early. No one remembered. Not even my counselor. She pulled me aside during the ceremony, gave me a half smile, and said, "Didn't you drop out? What a shame. You had such potential." I smiled back, politely. Because that's what you do when your existence has been erased so thoroughly that even the people who once believed in you forget you existed. That pain, that erasure, had stayed with me. It traveled with me into every boardroom, every business deal, every late-night document review. It was the ghost in my backpack, but not anymore. As I reached the hallway window overlooking the courtyard, I saw the faint discoloration on the concrete where the pepper had splashed. I let myself stare for a moment, not with anger now, but with clarity. You tried to burn me out of your world, I thought silently. But I rebuilt my own. And not just rebuilt it, I made it fireproof. My phone buzzed again, HR reminding me of the session. I turned on my heel, made the short walk down the corridor, and stopped just outside the boardroom. From the corner of my eye, I saw the polished metal plaque on the door, my name, etched there in small, clean font. V.W. Kane, Executive Leadership. It hadn't been there last week. I adjusted the collar of my blazer, straightened the cuffs, one breath in, steady, and this time, I would walk into the fire first. I didn't knock. I never needed to knock here. The boardroom was just ahead, but before stepping in, I made a detour down the west hallway. The familiar scent of cedar polish still clung to the floors, the same subtle blend the building had since before I even worked here. It wasn't just a hallway, it was a timeline, one I had walked before, countless times, but never like this. The walls were lined with framed portraits of former and current company leaders. Most were stern-faced men in tailored suits, a few women tucked among them, their smiles tight and calculated. My picture wasn't up there. Not yet. I paused in front of the last frame. Franklin W. Mercer, the founder. He had been the only one who saw something in me when I was just an assistant, quietly doing more than my job required. The story of how I got here wasn't glamorous. It was quiet. That was how I built everything. Years ago, I applied to the company under the name Winona V. Kane. Reversed the order, changed the format. No one asked why. They were too busy looking for the usual things: experience, keywords, a name that sounded white enough, male enough, executive enough. I'd started in operations, data entry, vendor coordination, invoice reconciliation, grunt work no one wanted. But I did it fast, I did it right, and I kept my mouth shut. People assumed I was just Vivian Kane's cousin or something, never suspecting I was the Kane they had heard rumors about, the one who'd supposedly disappeared. Back then, Dorian was still a name floating around our family like it belonged on a throne. Every holiday dinner, every phone call from Mom was some version of "your brother's really finding his way," or "he just needs a little support." Meanwhile, I was surviving on black coffee and a mattress on the floor of a studio apartment with peeling paint and no heat. But I didn't tell anyone. I didn't need them to know. I needed them to forget. Mr. Mercer, the founder, noticed me about 9 months in. He had a habit of walking the office floors without an entourage, just observing. I think he liked people better when they didn't know he was watching. One evening, I was staying late correcting a payroll system issue. He stopped by my desk and said nothing for a minute. Then he asked, "Why are you still here?" I looked up and smiled. I figured it's better I fix it tonight than have a dozen employees screaming about missed paychecks tomorrow. He nodded, reached into his coat pocket, and pulled out a small envelope. "Read this later," he said, then walked off. Inside was a handwritten note, just one sentence. "This company needs leaders with scars, not masks." I never told anyone about it, but I kept it, and I earned my way up, one level at a time. Now, years later, I stood at the very heart of the company. My heels tapped gently against the tile as I rounded the corner to HR. Ms. Gilroy looked up as I entered, calm as always. A woman who could stare down a financial crisis and still make time for a cup of chamomile at 3 p.m. "He's already in there," she said quietly, gesturing toward the small glass conference room. "You want to see the file first?" I nodded. She handed me a beige folder. On the cover, in confident lettering, "Dorian Rusk Kane, Candidate Review." I opened it, scanned, and there it was, my proposal. Not word for word, but enough. The graphic layout I had pioneered for last quarter's rollout, the phrasing of value statements, even the section header I had invented. People power, leveraging human empathy in data strategy. That had been mine. Every line tweaked just slightly, just enough to pass a lazy check. Mrs. Gilroy raised an eyebrow. He doesn't know. Of course not, I murmured, closing the folder slowly. They never expect the ones they discard to rise. Through the glass, I could see him now. Dorian, dressed in a department store suit, gesturing with his hands as he spoke to two members of the HR team. He looked confident, animated, as if he had built something worth defending. I stood there for a full minute. There was a strange calm in watching someone step so freely into a trap of their own design. He had taken what wasn't his, reshaped it, and believed no one would notice. Because people like me were not supposed to be noticed. Ms. Gilroy leaned closer, voice low. Shall I prep the boardroom? I looked away from the glass. Yes, but let him finish. I want him to feel complete. I stepped into my office just across the hall. Took the HR folder with me. Inside, everything was as I left it. My planner opened to the current week, a sticky note that read, "Remember, still yours, always was." I slid the folder onto my desk and took out a small brass plaque from my drawer. It was new, engraved just yesterday. Vivian W. Kane, Chief Executive Officer. I set it gently on the boardroom table before anyone else arrived. Then, I placed the beige folder neatly next to it. The contrast was poetic. I didn't need to scream. I didn't need to confront him in the hallway or throw pepper back in his face. Because the truth was, Dorian was still pitching someone else's brilliance, just not knowing it was mine. The boardroom doors closed behind him. This time, they'd open only for the truth. I didn't move immediately. I just stood in the hallway, allowing my hand to trail lightly along the wooden frame of the door, like a violinist touching the strings before the final note. My fingers paused at the brass handle, but I didn't turn it. Not yet. Instead, I stepped back and walked the length of the corridor, taking in every photograph mounted on the paneled walls. These were the moments the company deemed worthy of remembrance: signing days, merger celebrations, leadership summits. There was a photo from nearly a decade ago, a blurry image of Dorian shaking hands with the former CFO, grinning like he'd just been crowned. I'd seen this photo 100 times. Everyone who walked this hallway had. This time, I stopped in front of it. My eyes narrowed, not out of anger, but clarity. Back then, he was already being molded as the next Kane success story. It was always so easy for him. People looked at Dorian and saw ambition. They looked at me and saw obligation. I don't know why my mind chose that exact moment to unlock the memory I'd buried for so long, but it came crashing in, uninvited. It was winter. 5 years ago. The kind that painted frost on windows and made the floors ache with cold through socks. We were all in the living room, no decorations, just tension. Dad sat at the head of the table, his fingers laced together, resting on a folder, the same folder that held the revised will. I didn't know it yet, but I would. "We've decided on the final structure for the estate," he said, tone clipped. I remember blinking. What structure? He slid the folder toward Dorian without looking at me. Everything goes to him. The house, the stocks, the business shares. It's cleaner that way. I sat back in my chair. Why? That was when Mom leaned forward, arms folded. Her voice was somehow both soft and merciless. "You've always been the helper, Vivian. You'll land on your feet. But Dorian, he needs stability. He's the one who'll carry the name forward." Dorian said nothing. He kept his gaze fixed on a spot on the floor. That spot got more respect than I did. "And what do I carry, exactly?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Dad stood up. "Let's not make this emotional. It's done. We're moving forward." I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I stood, walked to my room, and pulled out the small duffel bag I kept under the bed. It held exactly 3 outfits, a laptop, a photo of me and Mimi at my high school graduation, and $43 in tips. I hadn't deposited yet. I left before sunrise. I didn't say goodbye. I remember the sound of the snow under my boots as I walked down the driveway. It was still dark out, the kind of cold that sinks into your teeth. I didn't look back. I wouldn't have seen anything even if I had. That house never had room for people like me. That night, I checked into a motel just off Colfax. The heater didn't work. The sheets smelled like dust, but it was the first time in years I'd felt like the walls weren't closing in. Back in the present, I let my fingers fall away from the photograph and returned to the hallway junction. Ms. Gilroy met me at the corner, clipboard in hand. "He's inside," she said gently. "They just finished the preliminary introductions. Everyone's in place." I nodded once. Let him go first. Let him feel like the room belongs to him. She hesitated. "You sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." As she disappeared back into the boardroom, I watched the door from a distance. I could hear his voice through the thick walls, confident, charming, familiar. The same voice he'd used to con teachers into extra time on assignments, the same one that had talked his way into internships I'd applied for and never heard back on. "You took everything once," I murmured under my breath. "But if you cross me again—" I stepped closer to the door now, close enough to feel the vibration of his voice through the wood. "I won't walk away this time." The hallway seemed to hold its breath. Even the air shifted. He thought this day was about redemption, about starting fresh. He thought his sins had been washed clean simply because time had passed and nobody had made him look in the mirror. But the thing about mirrors is, they never forget. I ran my hand down the seam of my blazer, felt the edge of the transfer letter still folded in my pocket, the one Mercer had signed 3 years before. Full transfer of authority. Witnessed, sealed, notarized, locked in a safe until the day I chose to use it. And today was that day. As I waited for the right moment, I could almost hear Mimi's voice in the back of my mind. "Be quiet, Vivi, but never be small." I reached for the door handle, not to enter yet, but to prepare. Because when that door opened again, I wouldn't be the helper. I wouldn't be the girl who packed quietly, who smiled through being ignored, who stayed behind so her brother could have a shot. No. This time, the room would open to the one thing Dorian had never expected, the truth. By the time I stepped into the boardroom, the temperature in the room had already shifted, though no one would admit it out loud. Every person seated at that long mahogany table had felt it. Something was different. Dorian stood at the far end, gesturing confidently toward the digital screen behind him, running through a sleek presentation filled with buzzwords, graphs, and borrowed brilliance. He didn't glance my way when I entered. Why would he? To him, I was just another mid-tier exec, maybe someone from HR or legal, someone who would scribble a few notes and disappear. The silence in the room wasn't awkward, it was pregnant. The board was listening, but not quite buying. They'd seen proposals like this before, just not from someone so certain it would work solely because he was the one saying it. I stayed near the back at first, letting the moment play out. My seat, the one meant for the CEO, remained empty at the head of the table. Dorian didn't seem to notice. He just kept speaking, leaning into the pitch, quoting from a strategy deck he hadn't authored. One by one, heads turned subtly in my direction, but no one said anything. Not yet. That was when the guard passed behind me, slow, steady steps, clipboard in hand. He paused beside me, nodded once, and said in a low voice only I could hear, "Welcome back, ma'am." And just like that, a chill ran down the table. Dorian caught the interaction. I saw his jaw twitch, barely, but enough. He didn't stop speaking, but the words started to lose their polish. I took a seat at the far corner of the room, still watching. The board members shifted in their chairs. Ms. Gilroy met my eyes from across the table and offered the slightest smile. She knew what was coming. I nodded, once, giving her the signal. While Dorian clicked through to his next slide, I reached into my folder and pulled out the envelope. Not the Mercer contract. This one was different, older, more personal. Weeks ago, before this meeting had even been scheduled, I'd received a letter. Handwritten. No return address, just a soft white envelope left at reception. Inside was a note from Melanie Torres, my high school classmate, someone who once called me too serious behind my back, then later apologized for letting others laugh when I got skipped for senior awards. The note read, "Vivian, I saw your name in the paper last week, something about executive leadership and tech equity. I've been carrying a guilt I should have let go years ago, but seeing your name again brought it back. You deserved better. I knew it even then. I just didn't have the courage to speak up. I'm sorry I was a coward. I hope you never stop speaking for yourself. Melanie. I'd folded it 3 times and tucked it in the top drawer of my desk, right next to my fountain pen and the Mercer contract. That letter had no legal weight, but it reminded me what silence from others costs us. Back in the boardroom, Dorian's voice had grown louder, not aggressive, just defensive. He was trying to sell harder, as if he sensed something slipping. That was my cue. I stood up, walked slowly, deliberately, toward the front of the room. No one interrupted. No one had to. The energy in the space shifted as chairs straightened and eyes followed my path. Dorian faltered mid-sentence when I reached the head of the table. He blinked, confused, looking between me and Mr. Gilroy. Sorry, are we switching presenters? He asked, his voice dipping with confusion. I met his eyes, and I said without a hint of hesitation, let's begin the real meeting. For a moment, he didn't move. The screen behind him froze on his final slide, a branding slogan I had coined 2 years ago and retired for being too vague. I stepped closer to the table, pulled out the chair at the head, and sat. The silence in the room was no longer uncertain. It was absolute, the kind that demands acknowledgement. Dorian opened his mouth again, trying to recover. Vivian, I wasn't aware you were… I thought… You didn't think, I said flatly. That's the issue. One of the board members cleared his throat, shifting the conversation with a measured tone. Mr. Kane, we've reviewed your proposal. Some of it felt familiar. Dorian glanced down at the printed packet in front of him, his face paling. I flipped open my own folder and turned it around for the room to see. Page 1. An executive strategy I had personally submitted 6 months ago. Dorian's version was almost identical, reworded just enough to seem original. Interesting choice of strategy, Dorian, I said, my voice steady. I didn't realize you were so inspired by my past work. He turned pale. The meeting was just getting started. Before Dorian could find words to defend himself, I reached toward the tablet resting in front of my seat and tapped once. The screen behind him, still glowing with the last slide of his plagiarized proposal, faded to black. What followed wasn't dramatic. No sound effects, no theatrical transition, just a quiet video clip, 10 seconds long. Security footage, no audio. Dorian stood on the sidewalk just outside this building. The date and timestamp were clear in the top left corner, less than 2 hours ago. He held a bottle in one hand. His mouth moved animatedly. Then, without warning, he raised the bottle and splashed its contents toward me. My arms came up in defense. My face was turned away, but my posture said everything. The look on his face, casual, amused, was unmistakable. As the clip ended, I heard the subtle shuffle of chairs. No one spoke. I let the silence stretch just long enough to sting. Let's be clear, I said, turning toward the board. This isn't about mistaken identity. This is about intent. Dorian finally broke through the hush. I didn't know it was you, he said. His voice was strained, but he tried to sound composed. I thought you were some activist or whatever. You looked like you didn't belong. And that made it acceptable to attack her? Asked one of the board members, his expression unreadable. Dorian opened his mouth, then closed it. I folded my hands calmly on the table. It's not about who I was to him. It's about who he believed I wasn't. That's the real issue. Another board member, an older woman who rarely said much, cleared her throat gently. He thought she was no one, and treated her accordingly. The words landed like weight on the room. I reached into my folder again, this time pulling out a crisp document bound in navy with the Sterling Archer legal seal on the front. I slid it across the table toward the general counsel. This is a formal internal ethics violation complaint, I said. Pre-prepared with statements from security, staff, and a bystander who witnessed the incident. The footage supports the claims. The counsel skimmed the front page. This is thorough. I've also outlined recommended actions in alignment with our company's moral conduct policy. Section 14, paragraph 3, abuse of non-employees, acts of aggression, and misrepresentation within an executive setting. Dorian shifted in his seat. You can't be serious. I turned to him, expression still neutral. I'm being deliberate. There's a difference. Ms. Gilroy passed down another copy of the document, this one printed with an attached non-rehirable designation. It bore my signature at the bottom, dated this morning. The board will decide, she said, her voice cool and professional, but the CEO has submitted a recommendation of full disqualification from any future roles within our company or its partner entities. Another board member looked at Dorian and asked flatly, Have you anything to say in your defense? Dorian let out a sound, half scoff, half breath. This is a witch hunt. I didn't flinch. This is accountability. The vote wasn't dramatic. One by one, hands went up. A few offered glances in my direction, as if checking for approval. I gave them nothing. I didn't need affirmation. I needed finality. When the last hand rose, I closed the folder and set my pen down. I looked directly at Dorian. You're free to leave, I said, but not to lead. He stared at me, his mouth slightly open. Then, without another word, he stood. The chair behind him didn't scrape. It slid quietly, as if even the furniture had tired of him. He didn't try to argue further. He didn't slam the door. He simply walked out. I didn't watch him go. Mr. Gilroy handed a printed form to the head of HR, confirming Dorian's removal from the company directory and his access revoked by end of day. The woman nodded and walked swiftly out, heels clicking with the precision of finality. We moved through the remainder of the meeting quickly: logistics, realignment, policy reinforcement. Everyone spoke softly, as if the energy in the room had shifted and we were still adjusting to it. When the meeting ended, I remained seated as the others filed out. It wasn't dramatic. They paused, nodded politely, then moved along. No one congratulated me. That wasn't what this moment called for. 10 minutes later, I made my way down to the lobby. As I stepped out of the elevator, I noticed a quiet hush had fallen over the front desk. The receptionist, new, young, maybe just 2 weeks on the job, was slowly removing a plastic nameplate from the corner visitor registry. Dorian's name. No one spoke about it. She just slipped it into a drawer and slid in a new one, blank, waiting for the next person. Outside the revolving doors, the afternoon sun was starting to dim slightly. A few employees were clustered near the cafe across the street. They noticed me, but no one rushed to greet me. They were watching, learning. That was enough. At that moment, Miss Gilroy joined me by the entrance. She said nothing at first. Then, with a quiet voice, she murmured, "He never expected you to win." I looked out toward the glass doors. Dorian was walking down the sidewalk, his suit rumpled now, the confidence gone from his posture. "That's because," I said, "he never understood what it cost me, but he was about to learn what it means to live with it." The sidewalk swallowed him whole. I watched Dorian turn the corner from the glass-paneled lobby, his shoulders stooped, his hands buried deep into the pockets of that same overconfident blazer he'd strutted in with 24 hours ago. There was no fanfare in his departure, no confrontation, no shouts, not even a final look back. Just silence. And that silence, ironically, would echo far louder than anything he'd ever said. The building settled behind me. The front desk clerk was typing something quietly. The security guard had returned to his usual post near the revolving doors, and the barista from the cafe downstairs slipped past holding 2 lattes, humming a tune I couldn't place. I let the quiet wrap around me for another moment before turning back toward the elevators. I pressed the button and waited. The mirrored doors reflected someone I still didn't quite recognize, not because I hadn't seen this version of myself before, but because I had never allowed myself to fully believe she would survive the fire and come out the other side. The elevator dinged. I stepped in. Upstairs, the HR department was already in motion. A discreet email had gone out early that morning, a simple statement about a leadership restructuring and realignment of ethical protocols. It didn't mention names. It didn't have to. By 9:15, a few internal messages began circulating. "Did you hear? followed by, "She was the CEO this whole time?" Some of it was shock, some of it admiration, but none of it surprised me. Not anymore. By noon, I got word from an external partner. A recruiter from one of the mid-tier firms had reached out to our liaison. Their exact words? "We're reevaluating future collaborations with the Kane family portfolio." The irony didn't escape me. For years, I had been excluded from that family portfolio. Now, Dorian's name was the one dragging it down. I made my way back to my office and opened my inbox. Multiple headlines from press sites were starting to show up. Nothing front-page dramatic, but the kind of subtle placement you see when someone's being professionally shelved without ever being publicly called out. Former Kane exec removed amidst internal restructuring. Leadership ethics in corporate HR, a new standard emerges. Sterling Group tightens policy after alleged incident. No one mentioned my name directly, and somehow, that felt like the greatest victory of all. My work was speaking for itself. My title didn't need to be screamed. It was known. That afternoon, as the sun hit its highest point, I took a short walk to the founder's suite on the 21st floor. No one used it anymore since Mr. Mercer passed. The space had been left mostly untouched. Books still on the shelves, a framed picture of the original building back when it was just 2 stories, and a bold idea. I stood near the window, holding the folder that contained the signed transfer of ownership, his signature, crisp and sure, given to me 3 years ago. He had handed it to me in a private meeting, no lawyers, no boardroom, just a cup of herbal tea and a comment I'd never forget. "Some wars aren't worth fighting, Vivian, but they're worth finishing." I hadn't understood that back then. Not fully. But now I did. I'd held on to that document until the moment was right, and yesterday had been the moment. There was no drama in its delivery, just a simple placement on the table in front of the board. No one questioned it. They knew it was real. I left the suite and took the long route back to my floor, cutting through the innovation wing where I'd spent my first months, back when no one knew who I was. Or worse, when they assumed I was someone's assistant who didn't know her way around a budget. It was there, near the coffee station, that I passed a younger employee I didn't recognize. She was maybe in her mid-20s, holding a tablet, chatting with a teammate. She paused when she saw me. Then, after a moment of hesitation, said softly, "I heard what you did. That took guts." I didn't say anything right away. I just smiled and replied, "Sometimes it takes years to speak one sentence." And then I kept walking. Downstairs, in the HR wing, Dorian's exit was still rippling. I later heard he had reached out to 3 firms for potential placement. None responded. One recruiter apparently told him, "We can't risk your leadership style. It doesn't align with modern ethics." I imagined him reading that email, sitting in some coffee shop, refreshing his inbox over and over, waiting for someone to remind him that he still had value, that someone was not coming. Late that afternoon, I walked the corridor toward the boardroom again, empty now, no presentation. No raised voices, no false smiles. I stopped just short of the door and placed my palm against the frame. Last time I stood there, I had hesitated. I'd watched Dorian walk in ahead of me like he belonged. This time, I didn't hesitate. I opened the door, stepped inside, and I saw it, my reflection in the dark glass of the far wall, barely visible, subtle, but undeniably there. And behind that reflection, I saw the woman no one else ever expected me to become. There was no ceremony to it, no grand announcement, no thunderous applause, just a door opening and the slow, weighted return of everything I had built. 2 days had passed since the boardroom reckoning, enough time for press to circulate quiet whispers and for internal departments to brace for change. Enough time for people to look at me not with confusion, but with clarity. This morning, as I passed through the front lobby of the company I now fully owned, I noticed the shift in energy. Some eyes glanced, unsure of what they were allowed to say. Others nodded with silent respect, but no one stopped me. No one needed to. I was halfway across the marble lobby when I saw him. Dorian. He was standing near the security desk, a guest badge clipped to his shirt. He looked thinner, not in weight, but in presence. His shoulders had dropped. His hands fidgeted. The usual swagger was gone, replaced with something that looked like borrowed humility. Security had clearly hesitated to let him in. One of the guards stood nearby, arms folded, watching him like you'd watch a storm you weren't sure was over. But they'd let him through. One last time. Our eyes met across the space. He gave me a look, part regret, part something harder to name. He didn't say anything, just nodded. I didn't return the gesture. Instead, I walked past him and into the elevator. The doors closed, and I felt my body relax into the stillness. I hadn't realized how much noise lived in the presence of a man who never once imagined I'd outrun him. When I arrived at the 14th floor, Mrs. Gilroy was already waiting by the door. "He's in the conference room," she said. "Asked for 5 minutes." "Alone?" "With 2 board members." I exhaled through my nose. "And HR?" "Standing by. They know." I nodded. "Let's go." We entered together. Dorian stood when we walked in. For a split second, I could see the old performance flicker in his eyes, chin lifted, voice rehearsed. But it cracked before he even got the words out. "Vivian," he said, stepping toward me. "Thank you for seeing me." "I'm here to close a file," I said. He nodded, too quickly. "I just wanted to say, maybe we got off on the wrong foot. And I get that I made some bad calls. But if there's any space, even just behind the scenes, I could—" He stopped himself. "I'm not here to beg," he added. "I hope not," I replied. "That would be a waste of both our time." One of the board members shifted in her chair. The other stared at Dorian like he was watching someone slowly discover there was no parachute in their backpack. "Maybe I could consult," Dorian said, voice softer now. "Just advisory work, no title. I know the systems. I understand the legacy. It wouldn't have to be public." I took out a small envelope from my blazer and placed it on the table. Inside was the letter from Franklin Mercer, the man who had trusted me with the future of the company long before anyone else had known my name. I read aloud, "You carry the scars I trust. That's why the company should follow your lead." Silence. I returned the letter to its envelope and slid it back into my pocket. "This company doesn't hide its values anymore," I said. His face tensed. "Viv, I'm not trying to undermine you. I know I crossed lines. But this feels like you're trying to erase me." I looked at him, not with anger, but finality. "You erased yourself, Dorian. I just stopped pretending otherwise." I turned to HR and nodded. "He's no longer authorized for any role, consulting, advising, or otherwise. Escort him out." The HR lead, a tall woman with dark curls and calm eyes, rose without hesitation. "Mr. Kane, if you'll come with me." Dorian looked like he might protest, but nothing came. And he simply followed. I didn't watch him leave this time either. I didn't need to. Some exits don't deserve an audience. An hour later, we held an all-staff meeting. Virtual, streamlined, no fluff. I sat in the center of the screen in a soft blue blazer and spoke plainly. "Change has never come easy to this company," I said, "but silence is no longer an option." I introduced a new initiative, Leadership Through Compassion. We're restructuring not just departments, but the way we lead. The days of rewarding charisma over character are over. I ended with one line. Simple. Clear. Those who once had no seat now get to build the table. The chat box filled with quiet affirmations, a few claps, one anonymous message that read, "Finally." Afterward, as the virtual room cleared, I sat alone in my office, the stillness thicker than usual. I looked toward the hallway and imagined Dorian's figure fading at the end of it. Not in anger, just finally done. And the first name on that table would never be his. The morning air in the lobby carried a hush that felt too intentional to be coincidence. It wasn't just quiet, it was still. As if the building itself had paused, holding its breath alongside me. People moved with soft urgency, footsteps muffled on polished tile, voices pitched just low enough to suggest reverence or restraint, maybe both. The kind of energy that follows not a storm, but the acknowledgement that one passed through and changed things. My heels clicked quietly as I walked across the lobby floor. Coffee in one hand, tote balanced on my shoulder, a scarf looped loosely around my wrist in case Colorado's spring teased us with another late chill. A familiar rhythm, efficient, present, but not hurried. Not anymore. I was halfway to the elevator when the side doors opened. A man stepped through, balancing a 5-gallon water tank against one shoulder with casual ease. Navy blue uniform. Baseball cap pulled low. His posture gave him away before his face did. Dorian. I didn't flinch. We locked eyes for a fraction of a second as he passed. No words. Not even the rehearsed, polite fragments we might have used in the past to pretend family friction was manageable. No, hey, hope you're well. No, didn't expect to see you here. Just a nod from him. Quick, professional, controlled. Then he looked away and continued toward the supply corridor, guided by a young staffer who clearly hadn't recognized him. No one around us paused. The receptionist didn't raise her eyes from her monitor. The security guard offered me a small nod, like muscle memory. I kept walking. Some consequences don't require witnesses. They just need to happen. By noon, I'd cleared my inbox, signed off on 2 department budget adjustments, reviewed onboarding materials for 2 new team leads, and approved the final draft of our revised community partnership model. Everything that needed to be moving was in motion. Everything that had once been fragile was now steady. But still, something tugged at me, a quiet, persistent thought. I glanced at my phone. A message from the care home had come in late the night before. Mimi asked if you might join her for lunch tomorrow. Chicken salad and ginger tea as usual. I didn't hesitate. 2 hours later, I was standing outside the assisted living center, container in one hand, thermos in the other. The breeze was soft, the sun bright enough to warm but not harsh. Inside, I saw her waiting in her usual spot, near the garden, beneath the cherry blossom tree that had become her favorite. A pale green shawl wrapped gently around her shoulders, her wide-brimmed hat tilted slightly, sunglasses pushed too low on her nose. You always look like you just walked out of a magazine, she said, smiling as I approached. I laughed, leaned down to kiss her cheek. You always say that. We settled onto the bench beneath the cherry tree, petals floating around us in slow motion like confetti tossed in some sacred ritual. It was quiet here, the kind of quiet that doesn't feel empty but earned. I brought the chicken salad, I said. Light mayo, extra celery, no onions. She peeked into the container and nodded with mock approval. Still cut the crusts? Some traditions are too important to break. She chuckled and took a small bite, chewing slowly. Time didn't feel rushed here. There was no agenda, no crisis to fix, no performance to maintain. You look lighter, she said after a long pause. I'm trying to be, I admitted. It's done? I nodded. Everything that needed to be said has been said, and everything that needed to end, ended. She didn't press, didn't ask for details. She just looked up at the tree, watching the blossoms sway gently in the breeze. You built something better than an empire, she said softly. You built respect. I swallowed. The words landed somewhere between my ribs. It still hurts, I whispered. Some days more than others. She reached for my hand, her skin soft and worn with age. That means your heart survived. We sat in silence, no need to fill the space, no pressure to explain anything further. Mimi had always been that person for me, the one who didn't flinch when the truth arrived unannounced, the one who didn't confuse silence for weakness or gentleness for surrender. Before I left, she pulled an envelope from the inside pocket of her tote. Someone dropped this off for you, she said. Didn't want to make a big deal out of it. Just said you'd understand. I took it, tucked it into my bag without looking. Hugged her once more and headed out, the breeze tugging lightly at the ends of my scarf. Back in my office later that afternoon, after I'd refilled my tea and closed the last tab on my screen, I opened the envelope. It was a letter, short, careful handwriting. A bit uneven, like someone had taken time to make every word count. I saw what you did. I watched how you handled him. And I've never felt safer in a workplace. I didn't know women like you existed in leadership. Not for real. Thank you. It's why I believe I belong here. Signed, Kayla, intern. I sat still for a long time, not because of the compliment, but because of what it represented. Belonging. That had been the fight all along. Not for attention, not for vengeance, not even for recognition, for belonging. For myself, yes, but also for every woman who had ever been asked to smile through a theft, who had been given a title without power, a seat at the table without a voice. For every woman who was told to be small so that someone else could feel big. Later that week, I returned to the new leadership training hall. Once, this space had been reserved for senior executives only, a lounge built on exclusivity and ego. Now, it was something else. The long corridor was lined with etched quotes, chosen by the women who had helped build the new structure. No portraits, no legacy oil paintings of men who never learned their assistants' names. Just words, and names, and meaning. Near the entrance, just above eye level, was a quote beneath my name. Power is not inherited, it's proven in how you carry others when no one is watching. Beneath the quote, a row of nameplates, leaders mentoring the next generation. Mine was first, but it wasn't oversized, not gilded, just there, earned, simple. The afternoon sun poured in through the tall windows, casting a long ribbon of light across the floor. I stood there for a long time, not posing, not planning, just breathing. And for the first time in years, I felt something I hadn't let myself feel fully before. Pride, clean, quiet, rooted, and yes, the scar remained. The one on my knee, the one in my voice, the one in the shape of memories I didn't ask to carry. But so did the woman who refused to disappear. Sometimes the people who should protect you the most are the ones who silence you the longest. But silence isn't weakness. It can be the foundation of the loudest comeback. What would you have done if your own family tried to erase you? Have you ever had to prove your worth to the ones who refused to see it? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear your story. And don't forget to subscribe for more powerful family stories that remind us healing doesn't always come with forgiveness, but it always begins with truth.